There we are. We are live. So, welcome to Winterviews Series 4, Episode 4. I am your host, Catherine Silva, Cat for short. And tonight we are joined by the amazing, the wonderful Wendy N. Wagner. How are you doing, Wendy?
Really great. It's so nice to be with you tonight.
I am so excited to have you. We have a subject that is super fun that we've not done on the show before. It is all about Sporror, which is basically mushroom or fungi horror. And we'll get into that in just a moment. But before we do, how about we just take a moment and for maybe some people in the audience who might not know who you are, if you wouldn't mind just sort of giving them a brief intro.
Sure. Well, I'm probably best known as the editor of Nightmare Magazine. I've been the editor-in-chief there since 2021, and I've been working there since 2014. But I also am a writer. My latest novel comes out this July, and it's called Girl in the Creek. It is a work of Sporror, but I previously had a gothic novella from Neon Hemlock that was, set in it's like 1920s haunted house stuff. And I had a novel called The Deer Kings that was it was like a kids on bike adventure with horrible stuff. Mm-hmm. And I've been working in science fiction, fantasy, and horror for like a decade and a half now. And I've written in like every subgenre, I think.
There's so many to explore.
It's so much fun, right? Why hold yourself back?
Yeah, I had completely forgotten about the gothic horror one that you did, because I read The Deer Kings. Oh, wow. And so that one I remember. But yeah, you've definitely done a little bit of everything for sure.
Yeah, because I had a science fiction novel that came out in 2017, and before that I wrote tie-in fiction for the Pathfinder role-playing game, which is kind of sword and sorcery stuff. So yeah, just a full gamut of fun things you can do.
So awesome. We do have a few people who have who've commented. We have Carol in the chat.
Carol, hi.
Carol. We have Matthew in the chat.
Matthew, yay!
And then there was an additional comment from Carol here about Sporror. Yeah, Girl in the Creek. Compelling cover art. I remember when that showed up for the first time. It was pretty amazing artwork on that.
My mind was blown.
Yeah. And an incredible premise as well. I remember when it was announced, when you announced it and the Publishers Marketplace thing came out, and it was really like, ooh, this sounds creepy and awesome and right up my alley. And I was really fortunate to be able to get an early read of it from you. So thank you very much for that.
Thank you for reading it. It's nice to give it to somebody nice.
And I finished it this morning. I would have continued. I would have gone through the night seriously reading it, but it was 1:30 in the morning. And I just couldn't stay awake. But I first thing this morning, I got up and finished it, and it was very fun. It was a very fun read. And definitely Sporror at its heart, the fungi horror fun. And that's our subject today. And definitely something that has become, I would say, fairly popular within the last, I don't know, it's been more than 5 or 6 years, but it's like it's definitely a newer trend in horror that is, I think, taking off. I don't know what you think about that, or
Well, I think, like, on one hand, yes, it's like a new big trend in horror, but also I feel like it's sort of a foundational element that's been kind of growing underneath the surface for a long time. I mean, you just have to think of like H.P. Lovecraft's story, The Fungus
uh,
from Yoggoth, right? Or is that a poem? I think that's a poem.
mm,
And, so that, like, I feel like Lovecraftian stuff has often
mhm.
featured fungus. I think the first big book that we saw to really blow up that was like people latched onto it as they were started using the word Sporror, I think, was Sylvia Moreno Garcia's Mexican Gothic, which came out
Yeah,
in 2021, I want to say. But if you think
2020.
about it, in 2020, yeah.
Yeah.
But if you think about it, Sylvia had edited an anthology with Orrin Gray called Fungi that they published through her publishing company back in like 2012. So the idea of fungal horror was already festering within her and going very strong. I remember I wrote a story for that anthology that didn't get in, but was published in a different magazine. And I just feel like even then there were a lot of people that were just so excited about the concept. I think one of the reasons why at that point it started to catch fire is, in the in like the aughts, it was like, that was like the hardcore zombie period, right? Like everything was zombies and horror. And there was a lot of promotion of, there's like the cordyceps virus that ants
Yeah.
can get. That's like the zombie virus. So there was sort of a lot of interest in fungus, I think, that came from people who were obsessed with zombies. And obviously that really burst onto the scene in 2013 when The Last of Us came out, which I feel like The Last of Us has grown as the Sporror genre has grown. And in fact, like the TV show, I feel like it expanded on the ideas that were in the video game.
Yep.
It was funny because like I love The Last of Us, like the video game. And, I knew it was like this fun, spores were like the thing, but they changed that for the TV show. So it's more about like mycelium and hyphae. And I was like, that's what my book does. Dang it. I swear I didn't, copy Last of Us. I sold this book before that TV show came out, but I think it was just in the air, right?
Yeah.
But and I think just interest in mushrooms in general has been really flourishing. I remember I wrote down the date. I remember reading, it came out in 2005. Paul Stamets had a book called Mycelium Running, How Mushrooms Can Save the World. And I remember reading that book when it came out and just like being like, wow, there's like mushrooms are just so amazing. And then another piece of nonfiction that burst onto the scene, it came out in 2020, the same as Mexican Gothic. It was by Merlin Sheldrake. And that one's called Entangled Life. And it was a huge hit. And after it came out, it got a lot of promotion through like NPR and The Guardian and a lot of environmental magazines. And then all of a sudden, you had mushroom calendars everywhere you turned around. You had mushroom stuff everywhere. So I think just the mushroom has taken off in people's heads. And it's everywhere right now.
It is. Yeah.
It's even on my shirt. I don't know if people can see that at home. But I'm wearing my mushroom shirt.
Yeah, Wendy's got the Sporror fashion happening. And that's really awesome. I'm regretting the fact that I did not think to put any.
You know what? You're like dressed in the perfect outfit to go mushroom hunting. So I feel like you're like really on theme, actually.
So this is, I like to joke, this is the sporting goods outfit. Like this, if you work in a sporting goods store, this is what you wear, which is basically Patagonia. But there was this really funny skit on Smosh where three of them immediately throw on plaid shirts and beanies and are running around pretending to work for REI.
Oh, that's
It
great.
was like, yep, that's me.
Well, to be fair, if you lived in the Pacific Northwest, that would just be called regular clothes. Like that's just how we all dress all the time, unless we clean up and put on a mushroom shirt.
Yeah. So, it's fair. That's what happens in Maine. Cleaning up is wearing a good set of Keens to dinner.
Yeah.
So, I get it. Yeah. So there were a couple other people that had commented here, and we'll just throw up this one here. And then we also had another comment from Carol about the
right. Yeah.
which I guessed forgotten that it was mold and mildew in the yellow wallpaper. So that is definitely a good one to mention. And when you brought up Mexican Gothic, I just had this like visceral feeling. That was the first horror book that I read, that I had read in a very long time. And I read it in 2020. And that was kind of my like getting back into serious horror writing. And it was just such a like, wow, this is an incredible story. And I had forgotten that was also fungal horror. She did such an amazing job with that. And it reminded me of another one I helped edit a collection for Barry Lee DeJasu, who had a Sporror story. And now I'm going to forget the name because I'm a horrible person. But it was basically about these guys who get mushrooms from they harvest mushrooms from like the dead, from like coffins, and smoke them, which is also kind of taking a pull. It's definitely taking a pull from Clay McLeod Chapman's book. But this story came out, I think it was like 2018, 2019, something like that. So it predated it, but it was pretty frightening also.
That sounds amazing.
Yeah. It's a good story. And when I remember the name, I'll say it. Yes. But jumping right in to our questions that I have. So I already kind of asked the first one, which is about, Sporror's popularity. Sporror is a featured subgenre in your upcoming book, and more than a subgenre, I feel like it's very much the genre of your upcoming book, Girl in the Creek. Had you been wanting to write a Sporror story, or was it just kind of an organic fit for the story idea?
Well, my original idea for the book was actually kind of it had the opening premise with, the idea is Erin, her brother, vanished into the forest like 5 years before the start of the story, and she decides to go looking for him, right? And so the original concept was that, and then it was very, very Mexican Gothic, because I knew I wanted to write a book. Yeah, like fungus had to be at the heart of the book. That was what I wanted. And then I read Mexican Gothic, and I was like, I'm going to make a few changes. This rich family fungus stuff is going to change, and found like a whole new direction to kind of take the fungus into. And I think like some of that happened because I was like working with a cool writers group at the time. And like they were giving me certain kinds of feedback that some things weren't working. So it was great to kind of throw those things
Mhm.
away and to just kind of dig deeper and come up with like some other fun, terrible things that this fungus could do.
Yep.
So yeah, definitely. The idea from the beginning was always to write a book of fungal horror. Because at the time, like I had written these two books that had been published by small press publishers and they were horror. And I just knew I wanted to, I had no idea like if I could ever write a book that would be published by like a big five publisher. And I had
Mhm.
just sort of given up on that idea. And it's like,
Mhm.
I just want to write a book that is 100% fun for me. And what are
Yeah.
things that I like? And it's like, well, I like people in the woods and I like mushrooms and I want to have wacky, fun adventures in the woods with like wacky mushrooms. And yeah, so I just was like, I wasn't even originally gonna like send it to an agent or anything. I was gonna, reach out to the company Journal Stone that published my book, The
Mhm.
Dare Kings, because I was like, nobody will want to read this book because it is just like this ridiculous romp. But and then like a different writer friend was like, well, give it a shot. And then I did. I got an agent with it, and then it went to Tor Nightfire. But yeah, the whole reason I wrote it was just like, I just want to have a good time.
Yeah. And that's as it should be, honestly.
Yeah.
But it's so awesome, and it's very telling that it got picked up, uh, by a bigger publisher, because it is a fun story, and I think a lot of readers will have fun with it. Um, it's I it's been some time since I've read a what I would call a fun horror story. A lot of the stuff that I've read more recently has been very serious. Um, so it was kind of like I got into it. I'm kind of like, oh, this is kind of like I can sort of just breathe a little bit and like take it easy and not have to feel like this heaviness, I guess.
Yeah.
um, which is something that I really needed right now. There's enough heaviness going on in the world and in life that this was a really nice break. So
Yay.
um, now I have a question for you that's not in my questions that I wrote, because obviously as I was reading, more questions came to me. Um, I definitely got, because you started mentioning Lovecraft, I got some Color Out of Space vibes. Had you read that beforehand, and was that in any way a, inspiration?
Oh, like totally. First of all, Color Out of Space is probably my favorite H.P. Lovecraft short story.
Okay.
But also, like one of the main forms of so I've published I don't even know. It's way more than 50 short stories. And a lot of them have been in Lovecraftian anthologies, right? And
Mhm.
part of that is because living here in Portland, it's the home of the H.P. Lovecraft Film Fest, which happens every year. And
Oh,
there's along with it is CthulhuCon, like for like the writing track. And I've been going to that since like 2008. And
okay.
I know a lot of people who are in like the Lovecraftian community. I even like a few years, like I adapted my Gothic novella into a screenplay and it won first place as for like the
Oh, cool.
screenplay prize at that HP Lovecraft Film Fest. So yeah, like I don't know. I I wouldn't necessarily say I'm a Lovecraftian, but I have read a ton of Lovecraft. I own the annotated Lovecraft. I've watched lots of Lovecraft movies. Um, and I would definitely say that like cosmic and weird horror is like my favorite realm of,
Okay.
of fiction that exists. So I am sure that the color out of space was definitely an influence on it. I mean, one part of the reason why I even started writing this project was because I had been like reading about, the fungus from Yugoth, but, and so it's like, yeah, I would never, I can't shake off all the Lovecraft that I have absorbed over the years, but, I can only try to make his universe, which he wanted to share with all writers of speculative fiction. I can only try to like make it my own and make it inclusive in a way that he wasn't able to.
Yeah. Yep. And you very much have a lot of unique characters in this story, in particular. So that was refreshing as well. And then the other influence that I saw, and I wasn't sure if it had been an influence for you, but I saw a little bit of John Carpenter and The Thing in there. There's a lot of body horror. Too much away. Definitely some freaky visuals. So I wasn't sure if that was also something that had come to mind when you were.
I don't know how many times I've seen The Thing, but it's a lot. It's in my top 5 favorite horror movies for sure. Yeah. So yeah. It's kind of funny. There's in the body horror stuff, there are like some weird melting elements that involve, because like fungus dissolve things. And yeah, I think I always wanted to write something that involved that. And I hadn't really thought about the fact that probably that owes a huge debt to The Thing and John Carpenter.
Yeah. There's a scene in particular, which I will not give anything away, but there's, characters searching for another character who has not been seen for a while. And I knew immediately something terrible, was brewing. And it was, more awful than I could have imagined. But it really was just like, oh God, oh no, oh God. So yeah, no, you did a great job of really creating some scary visuals in the book in that way.
You just made my day.
Mushrooms. Who knew? So in addition to what we've been talking about, Sporror typically carries an undercurrent of symbiosis. Of things connecting together and being part of a larger whole. How have you used this idea to represent the horror in your book without giving away any spoilers?
Well, I think so. I don't think it's a spoiler because the very first scene in the book is told from the point of view of a coyote who has been infected with this particular kind of fungus. And the fungus is influencing its thoughts and behavior and trying to spread itself to the body of a dead woman that the coyote has stumbled upon. So I think throughout the story, there is a strong emphasis on how all these different creatures and people, all these different beings are connected by this fungus. And it's very strongly contrasted to the people in the story who are, they're not connected, except in the way that we do connect via like speech and stuff like that. So I think that idea of connection was really important to me. And I think part of that is because I've spent like a ton of time reading about like what Susan Simbiard calls like the wood wide web, right? Like the network of fungus that connects all the trees and the forests and things like that, and how that is like such a super critical component to how forests function, and how we have, in many places destroyed that, and how, in a lot of places, particularly like in a city, you plant a tree and it will never grow as well as it will if it was in a forest, because it can't connect to other trees, because there's no mycelium network to connect it to those trees. And so I think that was something that was really in my head. I don't know if I answered the question right.
Yeah, you did. And something that hadn't occurred to me really until now, and you did a great job with this, was the contrasting the connection that these creatures that have had the fungus sort of that's taken over them, their symbiosis and their connection feels very like genuine, and I don't know, just there's something like almost peaceful about it. And then the characters in this story, because of everything that's going on, there's a franticness to their movements, and there is a disconnectedness to their movements, where they are frequently separated from each other and not knowing what's going on with one another. And so seeing that, kind of thinking about that after the effect, was just kind of like, oh yeah, you really did like have this undercurrent of like, yeah, fungi, there is something really harmonious to fungi, even though it is seen as the antagonist in this story, or at least it's something that our characters have to contend with. It's seen as being sort of all together, and our characters are just kind of floundering in the dark, trying to figure out what's going on, and not being connected to one another. And that,
I think you just did a really great summary.
Yeah, it's just it's well executed. So but I'm sort of getting off track in my brain. The cat is distracting me because he's in my lap right now, which doesn't usually happen.
Aw, cute.
And I think here, where am I?
While you recollect yourself, I'm going to insert one other thing that I wanted to talk
about
a little bit in the story. Is so something that's really important to me that I've been involved with here in Portland for a while is we have a really great resource for encouraging like native plants to like build habitat for animals and pollinators especially. And so that was definitely something that was on my mind, was contrasting native species with invasive species. And obviously we learned that we see that this fungus is an invasive species. And so that was just a tiny side note, but that is like another thread that was important to me in creating the story.
Yeah, and that was really well done too. Man, I feel like I had something just now to riff off of that, and it's already gone. I feel like maybe I've got some fungal spores in my brain right now. So one, I guess, okay. That's Annie freaked out. A question that I have that's not in my original repertoire. There is an undercurrent of grief in this story. It's a subject that we've talked about on this program multiple times. What was where did the idea, I guess, to incorporate grief horror come from when you were originally starting the concept of the story?
That is a good question. I feel like it kind of started out as just sort of like Oregon, the Pacific Northwest has, a lot of missing people. It's not like the highest population of missing people, but I'd read a lot of books like can't think of the name of it, but there's like a really good book about missing people in the national parks. And growing up, like, when I was a little kid, we lived outside of Spokane, and every night we watched the news. And there was a newscaster named Shelley Monahan that when I was a little kid, I just thought she was like the most amazing person like ever. And, like she was attacked by a serial killer and only barely got away.
Oh, shit.
I should have looked him up. I feel like it's Ted Bundy, but it might not be. But, in the 1980s and in the 70s, like the Pacific Northwest had a lot of very active serial killers, like the Green River Killer just in Seattle, the Santiam Highway Killer in Oregon. And I think there was just a strong sense that the Pacific Northwest is a place where people can go missing and you will never find them. And so I think, that was something that influenced me writing the Deer Kings. And I think it stayed with me, and I wanted to keep exploring it. And so the idea of missing people and serial killers became an important part of Girl in the Creek because of that. And then revising it, in 2020, my dad had a couple of very serious strokes. And he went to PT and OT, and he did a lot better after that, but he was also diagnosed with like lymphoma. And so it was like he wasn't dead, but he was dying. And so I think writing it, I was particularly when I revised it, because I wrote the book in like late 2020 and 2021, and then it sort of sat around for a little while. And so revising it, I think there was a lot of that feeling inside, compounded with like, deep grief for like in 2020 here in Oregon, we had some tremendous fires, and actually like one of the seed for this book was taking a drive up the Clackamas River and visiting some, just communities along its edge that are really close to my house. But like just thinking a lot about the river and its history and stuff like that. And so then, only a few months later to have these extremely horrific fires come through and burn down, tremendous landmarks. And this happened, throughout the state. There's a lot of amazing places that are just gone forever now. And I think, so I was in a state of grief for the world, for nature, for the environment. And so I think that grief combined with like the stuff going on with my family really informed the editing part of the project. It became a much bigger element than it had in the original, in the drafting.
Yeah. I mean, it was very, I felt it. It was a very prominent feeling, especially the feeling of nature, of wanting to protect nature, and just feeling kind of helpless in that. And we get some insight into the character's brother and his struggles, and you really feel it. So it's the eco horror aspects of the book, the humans relationship to nature, and how we feel dwarfed by it, how it feels like it's impossible to protect it, was definitely there. We did last week, we had a whole discussion about eco horror with Corey Fahrenkopf. And of course, Sporror is a, tangent off of eco horror.
Yeah.
But there are similar aspects to it. And it's just it's a feeling that is also kind of circling now because of certain protections and things being lost, national park people who are losing their jobs. It's always present and always there, so it feels very relevant right now. I see a comment from Matthew here. It's a question. So we have stories like Kingfisher's What Moves the Dead, where fungal invader is other and done away with. And we have Last of Us, where it takes over and can be seen as environmental revenge. Where does your new story fit, given it's an invasive fungus?
It's a little column A and a little column B, I think, because it is an invasive fungus. You learn some of its backstory, and it's the color out of space kind of fungus. But a lot of the reason why it can grow and expand the way that it has is because of things that we have done to the landscape and because of global warming. Throughout the book, people talk about like, oh, it's been such a warm winter, and they talk about, the warm rain, and we do hear a lot now, like, I think they like sampled it, and they even talk about it, I think, in the first episode of the TV show version of The Last of Us, which is like one of the things that has made fungus like a less dangerous organism than like bacteria for us to deal with is just the difference in like temperature. Like it's cold, it that like helps keep it from expanding its foothold into the world. But like now that it's warmer, like we're gonna see disease pathogens based around fungus like exploding throughout our population, and it's not really something that medicine is capable of handling. So so part of what the book is about is like, maybe this fungus would be no big deal if it wasn't for climate change and for the environmental havoc that we've wreaked upon the landscape. Yeah. I like to think that the ending has like some other implications, but I don't want to give it away.
It just made me think, like, after Sporror, we're going to have the next like eco horror tangent that comes off is going to be tick horror. We want to talk about like, awful consequences from warm winters. That's like a serious issue in Maine here.
Yeah.
Is moose populations being impacted by ticks because of warmer winters, and their season is longer. And that's absolutely horrifying to think about.
Truly hideous.
Yeah. The other thing that came to me when we jump back into talking about the fungus here was, and it reminded me, basically any time that we get into something that has a collective consciousness, it makes me think of Star Trek.
Yeah.
And the Borg. Like,
Yeah.
instantly, something that is horrifying to me. They'll always be one of the more terrifying monsters for me personally. But anything that has that kind of scary collective consciousness is frightening, because there's a loss of uniqueness, and there's a loss of like character. So when you were creating this fungus, where were your thoughts in that realm?
That is a good question. I think I was definitely drawing on that fear. I think everybody has it. Like the idea of, I mean, we all treasure our identity and our sense of self. And it was the kind of thing that I think is probably like our deepest horror, is losing ourselves. And I mean, it's one of the reasons why we're afraid of death. It's one of the reasons why we're afraid of things like Alzheimer's. You know, it's the most precious thing you have is yourself. And to lose it, I think, or to have it eroded from you is, yeah, I mean, I think it's the ultimate terror. So that, I think that is a big part of what made the fungus scary to me.
Yeah. No, I agree. That is just terrifying on its own. So now, not terrifying question. More fun question. Which is setting. Because you obviously live in the Pacific Northwest, and the Pacific Northwest is a very strong character in this book. So can you tell us a bit about creating that character in this book? Sort of what the Pacific Northwest sort of means to you as a character that you write in a few of your books anyway. And then I'll ask a follow-up question on top.
Okay. Well, I mean, I would say like the bad news to, you know, all my publishers and stuff is like, I really only have one thing I write about, and it's the Pacific Northwest. I love it here. It's, living here is like, it's what I am. It's who I am. You know, I've always lived here, and I just really like it here. Part of the reason why I wanted to write this book in the setting that it's set in is it's going to sound a little dorky, but like in, I think 2016 or 2017, there was a movie that was called The Green Room that came out. It's fantastic. But it was filmed like, I don't know, 20 miles from my house, right?
Okay.
And where I currently live. And a lot of the things that I have written before about the Pacific Northwest are influenced by where I grew up on the Oregon coast, which is, as a side note, you know, it's like the kind of place that gets like 90 inches of rain a year. And it's the kind of place where you know, like we literally would in the winter get like mushrooms growing out of our stuff. So yeah, it's that environment that's just rife with mushroom horror just everywhere. But in this book, I wanted to write more about like the area where I live now. I live really close to Portland, Oregon, but just the flip side of my county is really rural, and includes like the Salmon Huckleberry Wilderness, which is like a fantastically beautiful area to go hiking in. And, you know, it's on the flanks of Mount Hood, which is, you know, a really gorgeous mountain. So I definitely wanted to write about that. But I really appreciated the way that Green Room captured some of the horribleness that exists in the area where I live, you know, like the idea that there would be like a skinhead neo-Nazi club just a few miles away was not. It's like, that doesn't seem far-fetched at all. It's like, you know, in 2020, we had these like huge wildfires going on, and there was actually like an armed militia that was like stopping people's cars. And if they were like people of color, were like harassing them. So, you know, there's a lot of rednecks and darkness that exists. And so for me, there's always like this tension between like living in this beautiful place and the awfulness that can be humanity in a beautiful place. So I think that's kind of where I started from with the book. And that's sort of like the beginning of the character that you get there. And of course, it's informed by growing up here in that time where there were all the serial killers. And it's informed too just by like, I love reading about Oregon history. It's one of my favorite things. In the back of the book, in the acknowledgments, I credit, it was pretty fun. So in 2020, one of the things that happened to me is I got hit by, well, it actually happened the day after Christmas, 2019, I got hit by a car and broke my ankle. So I spent a lot of time. Yeah, I had my own personal lockdown before lockdown happened.
Oh my God.
I spent a lot of time on my couch the first chunk of 2020. And I like started watching a lot of videos by this channel called Pines and Mines. And it was like this guy who would just go around exploring weird places in the Pacific Northwest. And there was like this cool video where he would like go to these like weird places and like caves and old mines and stuff. And actually, like in one scene in the book, you're like in like this old mining adit, and it's much of the description is just lifted straight from watching his video. There's like a moment where they're walking down this adit and like they stop and like shine the light down, and there's just this water-filled like square in the bottom of the floor, and it just like goes, you can just see this ladder going down, down, down into this water, and you're like, it could be 100 feet deep, it could be 1,000 feet deep, you don't know, and you could have just walked into that. And so that was like a huge influence on like the whole book, like seeing these, you know, like we have this image of like what mines are like in movies, and they're like here they're like disgusting and wet and gross and full of like rotten wood. And I was like, this is amazing, I have to write about it.
Well, definitely frightening. One of the more frightening parts in the book, in my opinion, the mines. And let's see, I was just about to say there was we have comments here from people, so to just show those real quick. Very fair. So my follow-up question on that is, there is a town in particular where a lot of the action in the book happens. And is that based on a real place?
Yes. And no, and yes. So on the Clackamas River, there is there is a dam that's called the Faraday Dam. And when they were building it, there were 2 tent cities where people lived working on it. And one was called Cazadero and one was called Faraday. And both of them, you know, they were just like working camps. And one or both, I can't remember, did wind up burning down. And so today on on the Clackamas River, there's this charming town called Estacada. That's like a small logging-y kind of town. And it is very much what my town, Faraday, is modeled after. But I just like, in my version, in my head, it's like, if the town of Faraday hadn't burned down, it would have grown up and Estacada would have never been. So that's kind of my idea.
Okay. All right. So now we're into our two sort of like endish of the program follow-up questions. The first, I ask everybody the same questions basically every episode, but for this one, it would be any other Sporror related TV or movies or books or games or anything like that you felt like you wanted to mention or you were inspired by or anything like that.
Sure. Well, on the book front, we already talked about Mexican Gothic, but if you haven't read it, it's tremendous and is not to be missed. But some other books, one that for me was hugely influential is Jeff Vandermeer's novel Finch. He has a whole trilogy of the Ambergris trilogy. I have only read Finch. I own Duncan Shriek, but I still haven't read it yet. But Finch is like super accessible and super enjoyable, and I totally recommend it. Another book that I think is maybe a little lesser known, but is like a really delightful Sporror novel. It's the second in a series, but you don't have to read them connected because they can stand on their own. It's called Creatures of Want and Ruin by Molly Tamser. It's set on Long Island, and it's got like it's in Prohibition, and it's about mushrooms that can mess with your mind, but also maybe have magical weirdness going on as well. So I feel like that book is not as well known as Mexican Gothic, but it is a blast and should not be missed. There's some other books that I've loved that involve some fungus elements, and I would say one of them is Chuck Wendig's Wanderers, and one that's on my list that I have not read but I really want to is Sorrowland by Rivers Solomon. I hear it's really good. So that's on my list of books to check out. If you didn't watch The Last of Us, the TV show, you should binge it really quickly before the second season comes out because it's going to be good. If you haven't played the video The Last of Us, you are missing out because The Last of Us and the prequel to it, which is like the backstory about the girl character. And then the second, like if you put together the trilogy of games, you have like one of the all-time great story arcs of all time. I feel like the second video game is like one of the most emotionally manipulative experiences you can ever have, and I'm here for it. I love it. Yeah, absolutely.
Oh, I haven't played the second one yet. And I'm like I have the first one. I've watched a walkthrough of the prequel. And then obviously have seen season 1 of the show. And I think the biggest difference, the TV show really gets into the characters just a little bit more. Like it really develops some of the side characters a little more and really makes you care about them, specifically episode 3, if I remember correctly.
Yeah, that's so good.
One of the best episodes ever. But yeah, I agree. If you guys haven't seen it or played it, you really should.
There's also a fun extra connection between The Last of Us and Girl in the Creek, and that is that the artist Greg Ruth was hired by HBO to do a whole bunch of promotional art for The Last of Us. He's also
Whoa,
the artist who did the cover for Girl in the Creek. I think
that's
he
so
did the
cool.
cover of T. Kingfisher's mushroom book as well.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, the man knows his mushrooms.
All right. Yeah, that's really cool. I did
Yeah.
not know that. That's rad. That's
Yeah.
cool.
He also did like the artwork for the album, like the LP, like the vinyl album editions of the like soundtrack to Dune and Dune 2. Like he's like amazing.
Wow. Yeah, that's really cool.
Yeah.
Huh. Somebody had commented here. Yeah. So definitely check out that cover artist. What was his name again?
Greg Ruth.
Okay. Yeah, definitely check out Greg Ruth's stuff. I know I certainly will be. I am going to throw a couple more recs in as far as mushroom horror goes. The wonderful Mike Phillips at From Beyond Press sent me a story yesterday that he thought was worth mentioning. That's found in the shopping mall horror anthology that he put out. And the name was One Last Time, I believe the story is. And it was written, maybe. It was written by Derek Days Anges. I'm apologies if I'm pronouncing that author's name wrong. But it's basically about a shopping mall that's like overtaken by fungi that is being, somebody's trying to there's a construction company trying to overtake it to turn it into like luxury apartments or something like that. And then there's said story involving mushrooms.
Excellent.
So if you have not seen the shopping mall horror book from Beyond Press, you should check it out for that story and for all the others. And then I'm going to be a little bit selfish and I'm going to mention in our upcoming Boreal anthology from Strange Wilds Press, which is coming out on Tuesday, we have a couple of mushroom stories in that are quite awesome. The first is from Eric Fenn, and the name of that story is Waldine Samkeet or Samkite. I apologize, Eric. It's a really long word. I don't actually know how it's pronounced. But that one is about a forest ranger that feels like they're being called to the forest for something. And then the second story is H.V. Patterson's practical applications of fungal bioremediation. That's also a mouthful. And that's about mushrooms that eat plastic, which is absolutely horrifying. So if you want to, no pressure. That anthology is up for pre-order right now. And you can get in on all that mushroom goodness. In addition to pre-ordering Wendy Wagner's amazing book, Girl in the Creek, which comes out in July. So you should definitely get your hands on that. My last question for you this evening, which you've basically already answered, was going to be what your favorite genre to write is, if it's not Sporror. And I think you already basically mentioned cosmic horror. But if there's another one that you wanted to mention, if there's something else that vies for the top space.
Oh gosh. I think cosmic is probably my favorite because I love I love science fiction, right? Like I'm the editor at Nightmare, but I also edit at Lightspeed, right? So I get to play in the science fiction space. I love science fiction so much. And like, I think my favorite stories are like I love Aliens and Alien 3 like so much. Like anything that involves like the intersection of science fiction and horror is like really, really, I just love it. So that's probably, to me, it's catnip.
I will add to an earlier horrifying admission that I made on the first episode of this season, which is that I have not seen Aliens, or Alien 3. But I have seen Prometheus, which I saw in theaters, and that was an experience. And Alien versus Predator, which was,
I love AVP. It's so Lovecraft.
it is not a date movie, as it turns out. Especially
man.
if you've never seen any of those films before and you had no idea what to expect.
Oh man, that's amazing.
Yeah.
Oh man, that's hilarious.
Yeah, but no. Speaking of which, have you played the Alien game? The one that came out.
Oh, the video game Alien Isolation?
Yeah. Yes, Alien Isolation.
We started playing it because we borrowed it from a friend and we were like excited, and then they were like, "Oh, we need it back." So I've only played it like the very beginning. So I was just saying to my husband, like, we have got to buy a copy of that and play it. Because so like I actually, for my birthday one year, I got a copy of the Alien quadrilogy. And it's great because it has like the making of for each movie, which is amazing. But then the game that we do have that we love is a board game called Legendary Encounters Alien, which is fun because it's like a deck building game and you can play through each scenario from the movies. And it's kind of a blast.
Yeah, I hadn't heard of that. That sounds like a lot of fun.
It's so fun. And you play it cooperatively, so it's a nice like 2-player game, or you can play it with more people, but it's kind of fun for that.
So that's not the one that they made. Who's the Ravensburger didn't make that, right?
No, I'm not sure who put that one out.
Okay, because we have Ravensburger made an Alien board game.
Cool.
And we have that, and that's a lot of fun.
Oh, I should check that out.
A cooperative game also.
Okay, cool. We are a big board gaming household, so that is
nice.
Very appealing.
Yeah, we are too. The entire bottom of this table is all board games, and then
cool.
But there needs to be a mushroom game.
Yeah, there are a few. I just can't think of them off the top of my head. One of my friends has one. It's very pretty.
Okay.
It's not a horror mushroom game. It's like a nice mushroom game.
Sure. Yeah, I'm sure it's a cozy mushroom game. Oh, well, we are at the end of our program.
Wow.
And look like Soul's Journey had to run. But it was nice that you came and hung out with us for a while. Thank you, Wendy, for coming and chatting all about Sporror this evening.
It was so fun, and those stories in the new anthology sound so great. People should check them out because it will warm them up to help get through the long wait until July.
It's I had not realized that it was coming in July. I was like, oh man, that's a ways from now. I'm gonna be like stoking people up for that.
Yeah, it was
This,
originally supposed to come out in February, and they just kept pushing it back and pushing it back.
well, it is more of like a summer. Does it take place in the summer?
I think it
Or
happens in like April.
okay. So it's, you know,
But summer is hiking season, and that book is
yeah.
got a lot about hiking.
There's a lot of hiking. There's some hot springs. Like there's definitely some summer energy
Yeah.
in that book. So July will be a great time for it to come out, and everybody here should get on it. Definitely pre-order if you can. It's like I said, it's a very fun book. Definitely worth getting lost in. So add it to your TBRs and your pre-order lists. Thank you all for coming out this evening. That was a very fun chat. We loved having you in the comments, asking questions and commenting on things. If you're around next week at this time, we're going to be having Rebecca Cuthbert on the program, and we're going to be talking about monsters, because who doesn't love good old-fashioned monster horror, which can be, pretty much anything. So that's going to be a very fun chat. That will be Thursday, February 27th on the program. And yes, Rebecca is also the bomb. We have the best guests on this program. And I'm really fortunate to be able to get to talk to you all about your stuff. It's a highlight for my winter, certainly. So with that, I hope you all have a great night, and we'll see you again soon here.